Do you realize how much you communicate in a relationship and what a complex process you're going through, and you might not even realize it? Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Erickson, and I am going to be teaching you about communication in relationships. Now, the first thing that I want to start off with is there are two different types of relationships. We have externally initiated relationships, and when I say externally, I mean these are people that we work with. These are people that we're in class with, people just like me and you, and we have to have that communication to critique one another's videos. Then we have internally initiated relationships. Now these are people that we meet and we say, wow, I'd really like to get to know that person. Now these are relationships that we choose, and I want you to focus on that one little keyword. We are choosing to be in that relationship. Next thing I want to explain is in a relationship, you are either independent or you are interdependent. Now, most of your external relationships are independent. That means we are not dependent on the other person. In internally initiated relationships, you become independent. That means that you actually rely on the other person. Now, let's talk a little bit more in depth about that. Let's pretend someone introduces you to Bob. As soon as you're introduced to Bob, you've already formed that first impression, and you actually decide whether you want to progress to the next stage. After deciding that, you formed a basis of, yes, I am interested in Bob. So now you're going to move on to your next stage, which is experimenting. Now when you get to this stage, this is where you're trying to decide whether a relationship with Bob is worth the effort. Do you have anything in common? Is he interesting? So then you have to make that decision. Then you have another step. You've decided that, yeah, Bob's really interested. I'd like to get to know him just a little bit more. Then you move on to your integrating stage. Now, this is the point where you're basically around each other all the time. You start having more in-depth personal conversations, and you may actually even start being identified as a couple by your friends, by your family. Might even move in together. That's what we call integration. That means you are integrating into one complete unit. Now, after that, you only have one final stage, and that's bonding. Now, when you enter into bonding, that means that the only thing left is announcing your commitment publicly. When you reach this final stage, your relationship exists in its own entity. Now, let's talk about maintaining this said relationship. According to DeVito, you must have 3 things to maintain your relationship. Keep it intact and in its present stage. That means don't lose your intimacy. That is one thing that will keep this interpersonal relationship intact. And it's got to be satisfying. You got to be able to satisfy the intellect of the other person. Now, my last points that I finally want to address and quickly touch on is what happens if indeed you fail to maintain your relationship. Eventually, it's going to stagnate and it's going to deteriorate. You're going to go through several stages, but the end result will be it terminating. It's an everyday process when you're in a relationship. Now, another thing you might want to keep in mind, you have to have self-disclosure, which means you have to tell that other person things that nobody else knows about you. And you've got to be able to maintain it, or you're epically going to end up failing. Now, I hope through my video I have explained the different types of relationships. An interpersonal relationship is very, very different than an external initiated relationship. And I hope that you've learned something about how communication is the key in any type of relationship. So I hope you've enjoyed my speech and enjoy your night.